So, good morning, everybody. Welcome. It's Sunday morning, and Lizzie and Justin are live. Here we are for another week of Turning Towards Life. For those of you who have been waiting for us for a few minutes, I'm sorry we're a little bit late. We ran into a small, as we sometimes do, technical problem, but we are absolutely thrilled to be here again with a source that Lizzie has chosen, which, has so much in it. So I'm very excited to be diving in. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here again with us. We are really into something here, and I can feel the depth of support that this is for me and for many other people as well. And I'm really, really grateful for that. It seems like one of the biggest themes of my life right now is trying to be in community when things aren't easy, and noticing for myself how hard that is. And even though just staying committed to being open, and when people ask me how I am, actually saying how I am and not painting some great picture of it. I notice that there are certain situations though where the thing I'm supposed to say when I'm asked how I am is, "I'm great, thanks, and everything's fine." And realize that when I don't say that, at the moment anyway, it's because I can't. It's like I can't muster the pretend everything's great, thank you very much. And yeah, so this is where this poem comes from, really, is that I'm in a place in me for now that is really hard and has all the kind of hallmarks of what I know to be the position that we can find ourselves in when all our strategies are gone for having happen what we want to have happen, or have things turn out the way that we think they should with our families and our work and all the different domains of our lives. And so this poem spoke to me on Friday night because I was at my sister's house and got asked how I was, and found myself actually saying how I was, and realizing that actually it was a kind of social occasion, and how I was not particularly amenable to the thing that everybody else was doing. And so this poem was on the wall, and Hol said, "Oh, Liz, have you seen this poem?" And I hadn't even read it before, and it kind of hit me, probably because of where I am, that this is necessary for me to encounter and to consider. So I am here because I want to be supported by this poem, really, very genuinely, like I do with all of our sources. And I really want to feel into this and to accept the invitation that Rumi is trying to make here. So, Justin, shall I read first and then you read second? Okay, so here we go, people. And let's see what we can do to let this sink right in, even if we have resistance, even if we don't like the sound of Mary and Jesus and Christ, even if we don't like the sound of God. Maybe we could just see what it is to be open in spite of the words and the judgments that arrive. And maybe we don't have that as well. And let's see if we can allow this in somehow. So, the body is like Mary, and each of us has a Jesus inside, who is not in labour, holy labour. Every creature is. See the value of true art when the earth or soul is in the mood to create beauty. For the witness might then, for a moment, know beyond any doubt, God is really there within, so innocently drawing life from or with her umbilical universe, though also needing to be born. Yes, God also needs to be born. Birth from a hand's loving touch, birth from a song, breathing life into this world. The body is like Mary, and each of us has a Christ within.
So before I read it, I'm just going to say, for anyone who doesn't know, that Rumi is not a contemporary poet. Rumi is a 13th century Sunni Muslim Sufi mystic who was writing in Persia. And I always think for me anyway, it's helpful to know something about through whose hands are the words coming. And I think, Lizzie, this is a Daniel Landinsky translation, I think. So you talked about him a little while ago, that Daniel Landinsky, who is a contemporary poet, has done this amazing job of taking Rumi and Hafiz in particular, two poets from relatively close to one another in history, and bringing them to us in a way that we can engage with in the contemporary world. So here it is. The body is like Mary, and each of us has a Jesus inside, who is not in labour, holy labour. Every creature is. See the value of true art when the earth or soul is in the mood to create beauty. For the witness might then for a moment know, beyond any doubt, God is really there within, so innocently drawing life from or with her umbilical universe, though also needing to be born. Yes, God also needs to be born. Birth from a hand's loving touch, birth from a song breathing life into this world. The body is like Mary, and each of us has a Christ within.
Mm.
I was reading, Lizzie, I was talking to you about this just before we came on. A very wonderful book that we might read something from at some point by Matt Haig called Notes from a Nervous Planet. And he says something that's so totally, at least I'm finding really helpful in coming at this poem. He says, we human beings have basically not been around for very long. Humans in our current form, a few 100,000 years. The kind of culture that we live in now, where we have technology and agriculture and money and things that people make and all of that, 40,000 years. Actually, most of it 5,000 years. And then he says, and frankly, none of us know why on earth we're here. None of that development of this tiny slice of time in this vast, giant history of the world has helped us with the question of how we're here, of what we're here for, and we're always trying to work it out. And then the other thing he says that's kind of relevant to what I'm going to say is, he says, and it's so interesting to see that art predated all of our current kind of culture, and there's just been this discovery in the last few weeks of an even older kind of art that people had made than anyone had seen before, that's like 20,000 years older than the oldest art that we thought that there was. So we've always been beings who bring something into the world. And it seems to me that this is the first place I encounter this Rumi, is this deep feeling of recognition that to be alive is inevitably and always to be making, even if we're not making what we set out to make, even if we're falling far short of what we imagined, even if our life isn't going the way that we wanted it to go, even if we have a big story about who we're meant to be, there's a way in which we can't help being the kind of beings who bring, certainly if we pay attention, who bring what he calls God into the world. And God is all kinds of, like you said, we have all kinds of trickiness about this word because of various kinds of history that there are in the world. But this word, God as life, or the mysterious something that we don't really understand and yet runs through us and through everything.
Mm.
And that's how he can say that every creature is in some kind of holy labour. Anyway, it's such an extraordinary thing for me. I'm sort of describing it, but what I'm realizing is what an extraordinary thing for me it is to feel that. And it's what I forget most when I'm most afraid, or most sort of projecting things into the future and wondering how things are going to be, is I forget that that's what it is to be a person.
Mm.
It's very life-giving to know it.
Yeah. And I think as you're speaking, I'm realizing the bit that really speaks to me is the way it says each of us, like it repeats each of us has a Christ within. And I think frequently one of the stories I have going on, and I think it's quite common from what I've heard from other humans, is that we think that we're the odd one out. Each one of us thinks we're the odd one out, and that everyone else is in some kind of state of knowing themselves or of being included in something, and we're on the outside of something. And in a way, it feels like one of my life's work to go, I'm part of this. I am part of this. I'm not quietly on the outside, and especially if I'm alone, it's like, well, no one can see me, so clearly I'm not here. That kind of pattern I see a lot. And so in this process of feeling really lots of difficult things, I'm kind of forced into the position of asking myself, am I one of the each of us? Am I included in the world? And how do I then somehow practice differently so that I can feel a part of something? And, I'm part of so many beautiful things, like in really real ways. And still this gets me. So then I think, well, imagine if I wasn't in any kind of community and I wasn't doing Turning Towards Life, and I wasn't part of a wonderful organization of people, and I wasn't, and so many people aren't those things. And if I'm still feeling like this, even though I really am practically a part of so many things, there's a lot of us who don't have those connections and who haven't built them yet. And being excluded and alone and lonely and feeling like you're not held is a really, really tricky thing. And so this invitation feels to me like it's a universal invitation to be open to something other than our egos, other than our personalities, other than our futurizing, like you were saying, other than our catastrophizing, other than our self-analysis, other than our belief even in everything will turn out. It's something other. And I think that's why this poem right now feels like something I need, because it feels like the world is having to open up to some other sense of myself, of my who-ness, of my identity, that's not all of the constructed stuff. And in a way, I've got reference points of when I've gone through this before, but it doesn't really this process is going to have me, and I don't know if I can survive it. And I'm probably right, I can't survive it in the I that I currently define myself as, but a different I has to be born. And so when when I say, okay, well, if this body is like Mary, and I do have a Jesus inside, and there is a Christ within, there's something else to. And I'm not religious, by the way, so I don't know a hell of a lot other than my very rudimentary being at a school that sung hymns about me, whoever was on the donkey, Mary was on a donkey, wasn't she? See, I don't really know, but I feel like the invitation of this, I can really feel, because of the metaphorical invitation to be told by somebody from the era that Rumi was, and from history and from all of our stories and fables, that there is something else here other than the story I'm telling myself about me right now, and to be open to the something elseness, and to see what I can do to soften myself out of my personality narrowing into tiny thoughts and terrible lists of how life is really not the way it should be. And if I can let that be there and at the same time entertain that I might be being very narrow right now, and that there's something else that is also here that's being hidden by the way I'm thinking and the way I'm feeling, and let that support the way I'm thinking and feeling, i.e. not get rid of what I'm thinking and feeling, but let it be infused by something else other than the smallness and the rage or the anger and the feeling hard done by and feeling like a victim and like it's not turning out the way I need it to. And just soften into this. And I'm feeling like I just want to let people read this poem to me all day and see if I can let it in, and see if I can also accept that God is needing to be born through me somehow, and wonder what that is, and see if I can allow that and follow that thread in support of my questions, and maybe sing a song and see if that breathes life into this world in a way that feels okay.
I'm really struck as you're talking how helpful it is to come at this from two sides simultaneously. So the one side is you've talked about both of them really, but the side that you talked so movingly about is that sometimes what we have to do is to soften and to get that the story that we have about ourselves is desperately incomplete, which is what Rumi is, one of the things that Rumi is doing here by saying, he doesn't say some people are a bit like Mary and have a Jesus inside, or if you're lucky, you'll be in holy labor. He's saying everything and everyone is. So that's his first big challenge to us is to know that so much of the time, exactly as you say, there's a sort of small story that we have about what's going on. And before I say the second part of this, I'm really struck in what you're saying. We went yesterday afternoon to visit a very dear friend, a member of our community who is quite elderly and right now very, very unwell after a fall. And we went to visit her in hospital, and she's very frail. And I was struck in talking to her in the midst of her confusion and the pain that she's in, how much is still being born through her, just by being in contact with her and in conversation with her and being her physical presence, how much changed for me from being there. She is, without any doubt in my mind, innocently drawing life from the universe. And she's someone who's right now, while she's in hospital, her world is tiny, tiny, tiny. But to feel her depth and her love and her courage and her wisdom, and simply her also when she wasn't speaking, just the exquisite particularity and beauty of her presence, even when she's not doing anything, seems to me it's a great challenge to our small stories about who we have to be, because there's no way that she's being anything like I think she imagined or that she feels like she's committed to at this moment in time. So there's a kind of we've talked about this a lot, there's a kind of faith called for here. And the other side of it is it so helps us when we, in the midst, I think maybe particularly in our darkest, most difficult moments, when we take up practice that can bring us into the orbit of others or can bring us into the orbit of our own making. Like, to be a human being is to make things, and they don't have to be, in one way, they don't have to be like we're making by speaking and recording and streaming. This is a kind of making, of course. Here we are. But when we sing or we speak or we draw or we paint or we smush clay together or put Lego bricks together, or there's so many ways in which we can start to know ourselves in the way that Rumi talks about, So I'm sort of being really careful here. I'm not saying that to be a proper person is to be an artist, wonderful as artists are. I'm more coming at the other way, which is to know ourselves at this when we find that we have even just the power to put down on a piece of paper the scream that we're in the middle of. Is the sort of other end of this continuum.
I'm realizing, Justin, as you speak as well, I think one way into God, or whatever this thing is that's life and the universe, I feel like one way in for me that's a really straightforward way in is through people. And one thing that happened on Friday night was that our lovely friend Sue was at dinner with us, and she recognized that I was slightly different than I would habitually normally be. And she said to me this lovely quote, which was, she said, "My mum said this to me." And Sue's much older than me. And she said, "My mum said this to me." She said, "Keep a green bough in your heart and the songbird will appear." And it was such a beautiful piece of contact with something inside of me that was able just to break into whatever the sorrow I was feeling was. And it came from another human being, but it seems like a voice from beyond that's come to be able to just give me that one small, important, massive gift of that little saying. And it often happens with Sue. She sends me little things every now and again that are always the things that stick in my mind. And that one moved me so much because I could really feel the place in me that had forgotten to hold the green bough in my heart. So the songbird couldn't even land. And it's like this sweet invitation from somewhere else that's not my story that opens me into remembering that I can put that green bough in my heart, and that's what I am, is an invitation to joy landing somewhere in me at some point. And it's what all of us are. And it can get so obscured, and it can feel so dark and small, and we can be so mean to people around us, and we can be so self-isolating and forget the green bough. And just to be reminded from an extraordinarily kind, sweet place was so beautiful. And I want to stay open. It just helps to, I think, make a declaration. Like, I want to stay open to the things that might land in me from this realm of different kinds of possibilities than I can see, and to let those possibilities in. And I think that's what this whole deal with Rumi is really talking about, is that there are different possibilities here that we simply cannot see from our small, narrow personalities. And even the smallest willingness to open into something else other than that might bring an invitation from elsewhere, from beyond, that keeps us in the game, and that keeps us connected to something other than our small, limited narratives of who we are and what's possible for us.
Well, that's really what we need mystics for. And it seems to me that Rumi is expressing such a deep commitment to, well, what Matt Haig said, that I talked about at the beginning, which is, frankly, we don't know anything about where we come from or why we're here, not in the biggest sense. We have lots of increasingly good language for the science of it, which is very important and explains a lot, but there's a lot that it can't explain for us. And one of the things that can't explain is this whole deal whereby there is anything at all, and whereby what it is to be a human being with a separate body who is clearly also the products of something way, way vaster than ourselves. And I think in one of the poisons of our current culture, and every culture has its own poisons, but one of the poisons of our current culture is the story that we have about our separateness, that is sort of taken for granted. It's a given of our understanding of ourselves. And Rumi is saying, whoa, there's something else that comes through us that is not us, and which also connects us, which isn't exactly the right way to say it, but from which we come. I'm really taking from what you're saying, Lizzie, that one way of saying it, and this is why Rumi's language of Mary and Jesus and God is I think more accurately pointing to not the sort of particular rigid ideas that might have come down through a particular, religious path, but a much, much bigger sense of the God that is really there within and is also needing to be born, is exactly that which is being expressed through all life and all human life, and then we forget it. And that's what has us feel so alone and so apart from one another.
Yeah.
We don't really have models for it, but I mean, until we come to a mystic, whether it's a Sufi mystic or a Christian mystic or some other kind of mystic who can give us language or imagery or something for knowing this. For many of us, it's really hard. And I suppose just coming back to something you said, very often the way that we find it is not just through the words of someone like Rumi, it's actually through being with other people and softening and finding out how extraordinary and mysterious it is to be a living thing with no guidelines and no bearings alongside other living things who have no guidelines and no bearings, and we're all in this mystery together.
And the very moment that we don't want that, we think we don't want that, is the moment that if we did reach out, a different possibility would be born. I can feel in me, like when I'm feeling terrible, I really don't want anyone to know about it. The part of me that just wants it to be a private affair that just passes and then I forget about it or something. But it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. And every time someone is vulnerable and shares something with me, it happened yesterday. We went to dinner with some friends, and I just thought, you know what? That's all I need to feel all right about my situation, is that I know that you're in a situation. And actually, if we're all in a situation of some kind and we can all talk about it, it makes it better. So we're doing the thing that keeps it going by trying not to have it be real or something, or have it be in other people's understanding of us. And it's so miraculous to me and so moving to me when people are open enough and safe enough to just share what's happening. And then it feels like the opposite of what they thought was going to happen, which is I'll be ashamed and it'll be terrible and the world will collapse or whatever. And when I go, it feels like I've given the gift by saying how it is for me, or I've received a gift by someone else saying how it is for them. I just think that's, I don't know, it feels like that's for me, that's one of the points of being a person, is to be in that kind of vulnerability and connection with one another, and be brave about what we share, and just take the risk. And in taking the risk, so often people go, oh yeah, that's how I felt, or thank you for saying that because it's helped me say this, or it's like it breeds safety to be disclosive. And so often we don't really tell the story, and we don't really say how hard it is for us or what's really going on under the bonnet. And it really, really changes things massively. really, really does. And my I don't think he'd mind me saying this. My husband did something called the Mankind Project recently, which is basically a process for men. And I don't know so much about it, but what I do know is that at the end of it, there's a kind of homecoming ceremony where everyone gets together, basically in welcoming the people who've been through the program back into their communities again, into their families again. And the way that these men shared who they were and what their inner world was like and what had happened to them in their lives and what this work meant to them, it was so moving. I could not believe it. And it was so normal. It felt so good. It felt like, oh yeah, everyone's just telling each other what's going on. Like, this is normal. This is how we should be. And I think we've gone, like you said, Matt Haig said, we really don't know about ourselves yet. It's like that for me is a glimpse into just how much we don't know ourselves, because that's kind of what we need. We actually need that. And we're all in our individual houses. Nobody's talking to each other. Everyone's keeping up appearances, crashing about doing whatever they're doing. And there's so much suffering that needn't be there if we were open with one another, if we were in relationship about our difficulties rather than being ashamed and hiding it and not telling anyone what's going on. So I feel like this is part of what this is, Justin, and I can find my own part of when things happen to me and I talk about it and I'm talking about things here. I really want to continue to build my courage just to be really honest about everything and say what's happening and be radical about that. And like actually, yeah, this is really hard for me. And it doesn't diminish me. It doesn't disempower me. It doesn't set me into some box of useless victims that can't do anything in the world. It's just I've got like, that box doesn't exist. It doesn't actually, I think it does, but actually it doesn't, because actually if I say things and if I share, the world opens up in a different way. And I think that's what I want to create, is these communities where we can be like that and we can be really straight with one another, and it's safe and open and meeting a deep human ordinary need.
Somewhere along the line we forgot this. I suspect that we humans have known this for a long time, and that somehow, as we've learned other things that were really helpful for us to learn, we've also forgotten how good it is to be together, when we can actively and with care create spaces where we can be together and we can be real. Which clearly isn't every space and every place. There are too many of us willing, happy to use our power to dominate or to use what we've heard. Maybe that's what scared us off into retreating into our own houses with the, I don't know, the sort of the shallow replacements of connection with one another that come through our screens and how important at this time that we work to reclaim this, to make it possible again for one another.
Absolutely. Justin, I think that's a really lovely note to finish on. I'm just noticing our time. Thank you so much, everyone, for being in this and for being open to us and the possible sources that we bring. And I really feel the beauty of this community and the openness of it and the gorgeous opportunity it is for us. I certainly feel very held and supported by doing this, and I'm very, very grateful, Justin, for you and your open mind and heart to also consider any source that I get, that I choose, and it's right back at you as well. I'm really open to everything that you choose. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And we will be back here next week, Sunday, 9 a.m, ready to be in conversation again about whatever Justin brings next time. So thank you, everybody. See you next week.
Bye-bye.